I'm Jackie Miller, host of the Reconciling Ways of Knowing online forum series, joining you today from the territory of the Lekwungen, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples, where I'm grateful to be able to live, work, and study. Today's dialogue, Enacting Ethical Space in Knowledge Sharing, is the second in the series of online dialogues emerging from our plans to host an in-person forum this past May, which we've had to postpone in light of COVID-19. Before we turn to the session itself, I have a few quick housekeeping notes. We've turned the chat feature off and ask that you use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen for your questions. We will gather like questions together for the moderator and address all questions as time allows. Please submit your questions early. The session will run between 1.5 and 2 hours, depending on the number of questions received. And please note too that our speakers may have different Wi-Fi connections and volume levels based on their locations, so please adjust your volume as needed. We're recording the dialogue so anyone unable to participate in the entire session can view it later online. And now I'm pleased to turn things over to Elder Dr. Dave Kershane Jr. and Dr. Vicki Kelly to convene our space and open our session.
Thank you very much, Vicki, for that beautiful song. This morning at sunrise, I lifted the sacred pipe. And in an extension of that ceremony, I would like to offer, very quick prayer. Words of gratitude carry a lot of power. And in this power, it is this power from the Spirit that can help initiate a movement of real change. And in speaking the language that we were given by our great Creator, it also carries that power to be able to invoke the presence of Spirit within the words that we speak. So I want to share a quick prayer of gratitude to the Spirit. Vijay Manido, Pinanak Kumin. Niteake, Pinanak Kumin. Nimishum Stutuk and the Son Danima, Pinanako Minmin. Migach Mina, Dikit, Minik, Kagijin, King Nishnag. Morning giving chi chip madizit. No one that says the great am, to get the mark tau goes young, Noon dag was it, Minik, Israel dag was it, Kevin and Ishinabe. They came down, me where I fit the water, Kanishinabe, Minupimatizi. Me dash Kani Nazi book send the man, no gum, to the man who gain in. Skip to one way, figure not the man. Running gain in a Mikagichi, Kanamagozian. Way out so calm. Sigo Chanishinabe, Kakendamon. Way nego anin, Minekagi, Jimini goes at Anishinabe. I would like to now invite my brother Ira to offer his words, to begin our session here today. Ira.
Oki Nixukoa, Nistoako Pikanikuan, Kitkinets Matsnok. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank wholeheartedly Dr. Dave Kurchain and Vicky for their opening. In the Blackfoot way and the Nitsitapi way, music and song go hand in hand. And the expression of honoring the spirits, honoring our past, and honoring our contemporary elders is through both song and prayer. And we can't have one without the other. So I want to thank you wholeheartedly for those openings. You certainly blessed me today with your words in your respected languages and traditions. I just want to give an opening thought and understanding to this space. I just want to wish everybody well today, and our intentions here are to open in a good way and to speak freely from the heart. And I think that it's important that we speak freely and understand that in doing so, we treat each other with respect. It's very important that we feel safe to share our knowledges, share our experiences, and understandings of who we are. I bring to you today the understandings of my nation, the understandings of my culture, of the Blackfoot ways. And I'm very honored to be here, and I wish everyone many blessings today. And again, once again, thank you to Elder Krishane and Vicky for your opening ways. Thank you very much.
Hai, dansa toia kakeo, ketea, okimagane kwa kakeo. My name is Danica Littlechild, and I'm from Nasquak, Ermineskin Cree Nation. I'm an assistant professor at Carleton University, and I'm very privileged to serve as your facilitator for the session today. My deepest thanks to Elder Dave and to Vicky and to Ira for convening us in an ethical way, bringing us into this space together so that we can share with one another, as Ira mentioned, with good hearts and open minds. And I wanted to say that prior to joining you today, I put tobacco down in a clean place in preparation for this as a way of recognizing our traditional protocol to acknowledge what is going to be shared with everybody today. And it's an aspect of protocol. It's also an aspect of protection for those who are with us today and sharing their words and their knowledge. And it's a way of ensuring that that we can collectively acknowledge what we hear today, how it is being shared with all of us in a very particular way, to be listened to but not taken. and that all of us who are listening to the words today, whether that is in our live session or in a recorded way, can recognize your collective responsibilities as participants and listeners and witnesses to ensure that you always recognize where you heard these particular words, and ensure that we carry that responsibility collectively into the future in an ethical way, especially considering our topic is indeed ethical space. And I want to talk very briefly before we convene our conversation about what ethical space is. Ethical space is, to my mind, an approach that attempts to take emerging standards of collaboration and relationship building and create a process that allows for all of these standards to sort of become real and to be exercised in a way that that honors the systems of Indigenous peoples. In the past, in relationship building between, say, Indigenous and non-Indigenous societies, Indigenous knowledge systems have fairly consistently been made smaller to fit within mainstream structures. And I think with ethical space, what we're trying to move towards is to elevate systems of Indigenous peoples to a position of equity with non-Indigenous systems, to allow those Indigenous systems to function and to operate as they should, as they must, as they do. And to create a space between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous systems, of the oral and the written, that is ethically convened within some of these emerging standards. So let's talk about what some of those standards are. Many of us have heard of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which contains the minimum standards of Indigenous peoples all over the world, and which has been designated as the framework for reconciliation by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. And so when we think about the TRC calls to action and what they set out in terms of helping us to understand our road through reconciliation, that is sort of another set of standards that we look to. We also must look to what is very important for many Indigenous peoples, which are the laws, the Indigenous laws, the Indigenous legal orders, as well as sort of Canadian constitutional law and jurisprudence that helps us to understand how we can think about implementation of things like treaties, agreements, and other constructive arrangements between Indigenous peoples, between and amongst Indigenous peoples, and between Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples, and some of those other emergent standards that we must think about when we consider how we move forward in a good way, in an ethical way together. Ethical space is not intended to sort of be like a fulfillment of all the legal rights, but it's about ensuring that those standards, that those frameworks, rights frameworks, laws, minimum international standards. If we're talking about conservation, there's many other emerging conservation standards. We need to think about how all of this sort of rubric of standards can frame a new method of ethical engagement. And it's something that has developed out of some scholarship. There's a Cree scholar named Willie Ermain who wrote a seminal work in 2007 about this, published in 2007, and it's been further developed by many people to this point. And notably, the work that I've done in ethical space has been around conservation, and I think what it has sort of led to is a great deal of interest in so many other fields. It's being used in health. It's being used in some conversations around climate change. And it's because it provides us with a place for knowledge systems to interact with mutual respect, with basic values and principles, recognizing that these knowledge systems are in fact equal, that no system has more weight or legitimacy than the other, and there's a lot of sort of richness in how we can consider the way that we move forward in ethical space. There is no sort of formula for ethical space. I think that part of the beauty of co-creating and collaborating in ethical space is that it really requires that the indigenous peoples who are being engaged in ethical space actually are able to bring their own systems forward. So we're not talking about sort of like what some have called like a pan-Aboriginal approach. In fact, we're talking about a highly distinctive approach based in the systems of indigenous peoples themselves. So I wanted to give that sort of brief introduction to the overall concept of ethical space before we convene our speakers. And I really wanted to say that that it's important to know that as we come into this conversation, we have to understand that when we are engaging with ethical space, because we're bringing those indigenous systems into bear, there is going to be sort of a sharing of knowledge and a deeper conversation that will happen, that we all must respect how spirit moves in and through those words, and we must protect and respect that space collectively. So, so as we move into our discussion, I wanted to give a little bit of an overview of what's going to come. So we are going to, we're going to begin by convening our participants, Ira, Elmer Ghostkeeper, and Vicky. And also we're going to invite Elder Dave into that initial conversation. Once we move through that, we are going to begin by widening the circle to the Reconciling Ways of Knowing representatives for their participation. And then we'll move into questions and answers. And in that initial conversation as well, I think what will be wonderful is if we could call upon Kelly Bannister and Karen Smith-Fargy and Gleb Regorodetsky to provide us with any reflections or perspectives through that initial conversation as it occurs. And so I would like to now call on our initial participants. We will begin with Ira. If you would like to start us off, Ira, in discussing with us ethical space.
Okay, good morning. Thank you, Danica. And I want to once again thank the opening prayer and the flute that was given today. It's very important to acknowledge those components of engaging and beginning discussions about topics such as this. This is a new world that we're working with in a Zoom space, obviously. But in doing so, I do want to acknowledge the spaces that you all are in, where you come from. I want to acknowledge the traditional keepers of your lands. I want to acknowledge the elders of those lands, that they're in good health, that they remain in good health, to be our leaders, and those elders of your lands to be those knowledge keepers for many generations to come. I want to honor your youth that are in your nations, that they hear well, that they grow up in a good way. And with that, I'm very honored to be in front of you all today in this space. And I feel good moving forward in what I speak today about, for the reason that it was opened up in a good way. Had you had Danica threw me out in front in the first few seconds, I'm sure it wouldn't have been this comfortable. But I feel that, and I'm very honored. So my name is Ira Provost. I come from the Piikani Nation of Southern Alberta. I'm a part of the Blackfoot Confederacy. I'm very much involved in our Blackfoot ways of life. I'm a part of our Blackfoot Sundance. And I'm one of the 4 members of the Blackfoot speaking tribes. We stretch all the way in our territory from the North Saskatchewan all the way down to Yellowstone, and then from the Rocky Mountains all the way to where the North and South Saskatchewan rivers converge. There's a lot that can be learned from our land, from the lands that we have, although most of the areas that I speak of and that I refer to are now not in the state that they were. There's still a lot that can be learned from our land, and we learn these things every day. Like I said, I'm Blackfoot, and I come from the Blackfoot perspective. I understand and work with and are bound by our Blackfoot ways of knowing and our sacred and natural law. I'm a former member of the Eatskina, the Horn Society of Southern Alberta. My family is very much still involved in the Sundance that happens, or what we refer to in Blackfoot as the Akokas. And we converge every summer at the Blackfoot camp, and we offer prayer and we offer ceremony to Creator Sun, Istapadapiop, for blessings for our family and for our community. As I speak about these things, I want to preface the fact that I will not be speaking about sacred parts of our culture, but I'll be sharing with you understandings of what it means to work with that knowledge. In the Blackfoot way, we are very much a communal people, meaning that there is no one person that owns our knowledge. There is no one society member. There is no one organization or a group of people that own the knowledge. It's collectively owned. We collectively access it. And it's collectively governed by our people. And so as I work and as I learn and grow in my culture and in my way of life, it's like with everything, there's progressions, there's stages. there's our forms of life that start off with things that we learn in adolescence. And then we travel on and work with our culture, that eventually we become all the way to becoming an elder. And you can move through these things, these understandings and these knowledges in quickly, depending on how much you devote your life and time to it. I'm not going to relinquish my age because I'll date myself here, but there are people who are younger than myself in years who are elders, who are respected in our culture, and are rightfully so, because they possess and carry and respect that knowledge. So as I move forward in my culture, there's responsibilities to that knowledge and that understanding in its very pure form. And it's open to all of our community. It's open to outsiders to gain these understandings, but you can't read the last page of the book to understand the entire story. There is no shortcuts. There are no quick steps to getting to that last climax of the story. You have to understand every part of it as you move forward. And our knowledge keepers and our elders in our community, they know this. I've been fortunate to work with a lot of them that in our community. I know some of you know many of my elders from my community. Dr. Reg Crowshoe, Dr. Leroy Little Bear. They're my elders in both academics, academia, and in our societies. But as well, we also have elders that you don't know, elders who have been with our communities and our societies for decades, all of their life. And when someone speaks about our culture and is not truthful or honest, it doesn't take long to pick up those subtleties of what's right and what's wrong. If someone says, they come to me and they say, I know this, it's, again, it doesn't, you can easily see the truth behind the story. So again, my point in telling you and sharing this experience of being close with my culture is that it's a process. It's a way of life. To put it in a sense of understanding the knowledges that I possess, there's process. Once again, there's no shortcuts. And in doing so, once you get to chapter 11, once you get to chapter 12, and maybe a 15 chapter book, you understand that there is a sense of responsibility to take that knowledge and carry it in a good way. Because you find that there's times when you hear an outsider come into the community, spend a few days, a couple months, maybe a couple weeks with community members, such as researchers, and they find, I got it, I understand. Therefore, I can arrive at an opinion of what this culture is about. And to that, my thought would be, I can't see how that's possible, because the person has not spent the time to develop long-lasting relationships, has taken the time to really understand what these processes of cultures and understandings mean to the people and to the culture itself. So when we talk about ethical space, certainly with Indigenous people and nations, just like with any other study, with law, with justice, to become a doctor in any form, in any relationship, my goodness, what did you have to go through to get those designations? It was not a weekend course. It was not Indigenous Studies 101. It was a very in-depth look at what you were trying to achieve. And by the same breath, I understand that about my knowledges, my understandings. There is integrity, there is complexity to the knowledges that we share with our fellow community members and society members, and everything that I possess in my memory banks. It's not exclusive. I have brothers and sisters in our societies who share these knowledges, but again, we understand that there is responsibility to protect those knowledges. So when I speak about being ethical in my space, it's about protecting those knowledges and making sure that when outsiders come in, that they are treating that knowledge with respect. And there's many ways that can be, that there is, there's many ways that can happen, and that the detriment to the community could occur, and we've seen that, and there's plenty out there. There's plenty of studies that talk about the missteps that have occurred with the research in and with or the lack thereof with Indigenous communities. I use the knowledge that I have to best inform my community's leadership, to do the best for our nation. And the reason that I do that is because our nation, still itself, we try to find, we know our knowledges, and we understand what they are and how they help our community. But we understand that we live inside this world that doesn't understand who we are. So I think it's great on Indigenous communities that we go out and we share these knowledges, how to interact with Indigenous people, and at the very least, how to ethically treat this knowledge. Because there, again, there's so many instances where that doesn't occur. A lot of times when I work with companies, and part of my role in my community is a consultation manager. So I have a lot of external proponents with industry, especially in Alberta, knocking at our doors, wanting to check the box that we've consulted with a nation. And, it gets tiring after a while, of course, but it is a duty that I hold with great respect, to ensure that these companies are coming to us and saying, are we doing the right thing? And I'm certainly there to put my foot in the door to say, okay, wait, no, you have to really understand this component of our ways. 9 times out of 10, the companies and the external people who come to our nations give you that, yes, we understand, yes, yes, we hear you, but then it really doesn't go any further than that. But then again, there's that 1% of the 10 people who do. And those are the people that I look towards and say, you know what, you genuinely want to understand my nation. You genuinely want to stick around and not parachute in, parachute out. You want to know who my people are, and you want to see my people do better in this modern society. And it's those people that we have these ethical conversations. We put boundaries around what's right and what's wrong. And then when community members from the outside come in and take a deeper dive into our knowledges, they become more enlightened, and they become more willing to stand with you and to protect you and assist you in protecting those knowledges. And I just want to comment on Danica saying that each of our communities, as complex as they are, I'll say this, it should go without saying it in these times, but I'll say it anyway, is that when we engage with people from outside communities, the outsider who comes into Indigenous communities is always approaching us with a pan-Indigenous approach. What Danica said earlier is that, each one of our communities, we need to understand, have highly distinctive approaches about the way we work in spaces of relationship building and spaces of understanding. The what works in my nation is not going to be the same as the indigenous communities, even just next door, in the same region, and certainly not across the country. But we acknowledge each other, and we acknowledge ancient ties to our community. I apologize for my dog. He barks at his shadow. But we really want to understand that everything that we have is distinct to its region. And with that being said, I just want to acknowledge the other speakers at this time to carry on their words in that conversation. So thank you for this space, and I'll pass it on and then comment as we go forward. Okay, thank you.
Elder Elmer Ghostkeeper, would you like to begin your speaking?
Hello, Mercy. Istamina na skumtina al kahkio kan Dominique umota nistamida pikskuyan. Tansi se iskihtamun. Tansi iskihtamayan. It's an honor for me to be invited to participate in this Zoom conference call. Where I live isolated, and my Wi-Fi is very weak, and it's not strong enough to carry a Zoom signal. So I'm using my landline. It's got better connectivity. From my perspective, the society we live in and where I live on the Buffalo Lake Métis settlement, there's four aspects. There's a cultural, social, economical, and political aspect. And I'm a fluent Bushland Cree speaker and Michif speaker, and English is my third language. So I can't only just speak of one aspect to demonstrate a different way of knowing in ethical space. So I'm going to combine them all together. I want to tell this story. Noftiatsumun nigan. Iksipa utika muhtian suwak saigaiga nik. En pitwao misjagans inigamut. Kiksipa nigamuwana mana inigamut. This morning in my walkabout meditation and prayer, as I approached near the shore of Buffalo Lake, I heard a coyote singing a morning song, greeting the sun and the morning as they do. Igwa kapihtaman uguhta agwat si makan wapahtin tansisi itatsut. When I heard the sounds of the coyote, it evoked a picture of the coyote sitting on his haunches with his head and nose pointed towards the sky. When I hear sounds, what they do is evoke and create pictures in my consciousness just by the sound. I don't have to see whatever is making the sound. And this is a part of the way of knowing from my Bushland Cree culture and worldview. I think I've talked before about sound, and from the little I know of ethical space is also a sacred space. And I'm sure the elders involved in this Zoom conference and others have done a smudge or lifted the pipe to pray for this Zoom conference to happen in a good way. A part of the prayer is to create the ethical space, which is also a sacred space. We cannot ignore the sacredness of our sounds. And the air we breathe, from my understanding, is a gift of Mother Earth, of her love. So every breath you take, and to my way of knowing, we're all breathing in the same moment. We're breathing in the gift of Mother Earth. And so we have to give her thanks for her many, many gifts. Where I live, I'm living with the land. I don't see any separation. And the knowledge that I know and the wisdom from living in this place also is gifted to me by the land, Aski, which is a living being. I'm very fortunate and blessed to live very isolated on Métis land. The only way I see another human being is to leave my property and to drive to town or drive to the administration office, etc. But I don't live alone. I live with so many other countless beings. And I know when I look at the forest, the Broil Forest, I only see 80%. I only see 20%. 80% are invertebrates that are living with the land, as I do. So when it comes to attempting to talk about different ways of knowing and reconciling those different ways, it's a tremendous challenge for me, because the sounds I'm making now, the meaning is embedded in the sounds, and because you all know English, you know what I'm talking. But then when I speak like that, I'm still making sounds, but you don't know the meaning of the words I'm making. So it doesn't make sense to you. So it's just about impossible to completely reconcile different ways of knowing, even though we've created the ethical and sacred space to be able to discuss this. I hope you understand that, and I'm sure the non-Indigenous people also speak a second language, maybe French, or the language of the country where their forefathers had come to Canada from. But you know, I really compliment the organizers of this conference to begin a dialogue in this age of reconciliation, and also keeping in mind the pandemic that we're all experiencing. What I view it as, it's a major paradigm shift. We're undergoing tremendous change, a very complex change. And what went in when COVID first appeared in Canada will not come out the same. There'll be tremendous change in every aspect, in all the four aspects of our society, whether it's a community society or a provincial society or a Canadian society. And as far as I know, we cannot predict the future. We can only breathe one breath at a time in this moment. But we can pray, and we can hope, and request a better future than what we're used to experiencing before. And I really honor and thank Vicky for her music with the flute, and with Elder David for giving the opening prayer, and for Ira expressing his knowledge and words of wisdom. And thank you so much. Now I'll allow Vicky to share her wisdom and knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Elmer.
Abui.
Thank you, as well, for your good words and for sharing your good from your place in Blackfoot territory. Thank you, David, for your beautiful opening words in the language. It always does my heart good to hear you speak in the language. And I'd like to thank Danica for her opening and facilitation of this session, and the kindness and the respectful way that you've done that. I'd like to acknowledge that we are within the Reconciliation Ways of Knowing forum, and that we're honored to be here, and that I'm honored to be with you here today. I'm speaking to you from Sagamok territory in Ontario. I have the honor of being here on this land, and it does my heart good. I normally live and work in Vancouver and Simon Fraser University. I'm an Indigenous scholar there, and I'm an Anishinaabe Métis artist and educator and scholar working in the Faculty of Education. One of my greatest, passion or interest is in how do we learn today to carry the knowledges of our ancestors? How do we who work in the academy find our way back along that trail where our ancestors have left bits of language, bits of knowledge, practices that were part of their way of being on this land? Because what I am seeing is that we're looking for a new vision of how to be here on Mother Earth. I work, and I have the honor of working with educators who come longing for education within Indigenous education, but in a larger context around how to change educational systems to honor various ways of understanding, ways of being, ways of understanding where we are today within an environmental crisis, in a time where we have difficulties with our human relations. And they're looking to stand before young people who are looking for a different vision, who long to have a different understanding of what it means to be human. And so it is really my students who have impelled me, who have woken my heart and spoke to me in ways that have awoken in me this passion for how do we learn to hold these knowledges respectfully in ways that accommodate a profoundly different way of understanding both being human and all our relations. So as a scholar, I would say that one of the root etymologies of the word theory is behold. And as an Indigenous person, it's the being that holds. I have the honor of sitting today with knowledge holders, and it is those holders of knowledges that have learned how to hold those knowledges. So in my tradition, we have this beautiful understanding that the first human, Anishinaabe, went out into the world, and the Creator said, go out and learn the names of things. So for me, what does that mean, to learn the names of things? It means that you know the name of the thing in the language that it speaks. That you know its teaching. And that your job as a holder of knowledge is to hold it, accommodate it as it was given. So why I play the flute is that I can learn to be resonant. It's been the greatest teaching of flute playing, is how to be resonant. Gregory Cayeti says that a knowledge holder is one who has learned to be resonant with the multiverse. So knowledge holders hold knowledge in a way that is resonant both with the teaching and the ecology in which they are working. And they do that with respect. The next aspect that is really important is they do it in a living relational way. And I honor the words of my good colleague, Dwayne Donald, where he talks about ethical relationality. One of the gifts of ethical space is that we sit respectfully in a circle of knowledge. In the academy, we would call this hermeneutic circle, that each knowledge system sits in the circle, the family circle of our ancestors, and each has a place. The Cree, the Anishinaabe, the Blackfoot, every one of our peoples has a place in this circle. And if we take that circle wider, all forms of humanity have a place in that circle. That is the ethical space for understanding our knowledges. And in each one of these ways, that hermeneutic, that tacit infrastructure of being and looking and being within the world as holders of knowledge is different. There's a diversity. And so what I'm interested in is, what is the capacity that allows us to go from one-eyed seeing to two-eyed seeing to many-eyed seeing? To honor the work of Albert Marshall, who spoke about two-eyed seeing, seeing the world with the strengths and of the contemporary eye, and to see the world with the strength of the indigenous eye. Why? To see more fully, more comprehensively. So my students are interested in the capacity of two-eyed seeing, the capacity of holding multiple hermeneutics, multiple worldviews. Why? To extend what we understand about being human in all our relations, and to sit honorably within the circle of knowledges. That's how I understand ethical space. Ethical relationality is the ethic with which we hold our responsibilities in relation. That we can find ways of accommodating in our ways of being understandings of other ways of being. That we have an ethical relation. Ethos, with a part of the root of the word ethical, means that we honor that each being has its own ethic, its own disposition, its own ethos of being. And so ethical relationality requires that we accommodate these various ways of being respectfully and ethically, that we do not diminish them, that we hold them in high regard with deep respect. The next aspect is that there's this reciprocity. The reciprocity, and I honor the words of Leanne Simpson, there's a reciprocal recognition. There will be no reconciling of knowledges in this country until we develop the capacity to reciprocally recognize the tacit infrastructures of the other one's knowledge, way of being, and ethical disposition. That's a capacity. That's a living enactment of reciprocal recognition, ethical relationality, in standing in the ethical space. Reciprocal recognition requires that we accommodate in our ability to recognize the understanding of others reciprocally. And that reciprocal relation, that being in relation ethically, is part of what we are trying to learn in this country. And I can tell you that the young ones who sit in those classes, in those schools, are looking for these kinds of values. The value systems that are part of the teachings of Indigenous people in this country, the ways of learning how to value what we call the ethic of the holder of the knowledge. In my tradition, we call them the grandfather teachings, the ways of being human, the highest values of being human. And to recognize respectfully that other nations have other values, other ways of understanding that human pathway. And the last is our responsibility. I have a great responsibility. I sit and I work and I walk the halls of an institution of higher education, an institution we call the academy, the place of knowledge. But I understand that my responsibility lies to my ancestors and to the generations that lie before, the 7 generations. And I work with teachers, courageous teachers who are enacting other visions of what it means to be educated and the pedagogies for being human. And here I come to my last comment. What are the responsibilities that we have, and how do we create those capacities? In my work with my students in Indigenous education, I've understood that the Indigenous pedagogies, the makings, the bland practices, the knowledge practices actually are pedagogical vehicles for learning how to be human in our places. So as an artist, as a flute player, and as an artist, I have understood that these knowledge practice, these making practices make and unmake us and remake us in their process. We are in process. We are pedagogically mentored by these Indigenous pedagogies about how to be most fully human. And so my responsibility is to keep the echo, the voices, the songs, and the ways of our people, to keep them there, living, and so that there is a living echo available to the next generation. This is my responsibility. This is our collective responsibility. Because the vision of the day, as my students tell me, is discordant for their longing for yet another vision for both what we can be humanly within our schools and ultimately within our world. And this conversation about reconciling ways of knowing is core to this understanding. I want to just say one last thing, and I think this is the greatest worry, is that these teachings are given in images. The currency, the language, the literacy of our stories requires that we have an imagination to decode the teachings that were given through these teachings, through these stories, through the creation stories, the recreation stories. And Dan Longboat and Sheridan make this comment. They make the comment that how long will it take the imaginations of people who come from afar to naturalize to this place, to this land, and to be able to hold within their imaginations imaginations that are ecological to this place. That's a big question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Elder Dave, would you like to share any thoughts?
Thank you very much, Danica. Dojo anin dine magritte. Nigani yaki mine ishni khas kine do ten saging donde nishna bende. I would like to share my understanding of ethical space, which we began to create this morning, the words of gratitude that were invoked in ceremony, with the pipe ceremony and the protocols of other nations. The opening was done on this webinar was an extension of the gratitude offered this morning, with the invitation to the Spirit to lead our process and create a ceremonial environment and context for our work. This begins to set the stage for why the role of the elders and the knowledge holders is of paramount importance. It is through invoking the Spirit that we have always known that we can be influenced in our actions of daily life. The role of the elder and the knowledge holder is to be an instrument of the vision and guidance received from the Spirit, to be involved in providing that guidance to the people. As we talk about ethical space, it must be understood that the original people continue to find themselves in a position of marginalization, hardly an ethical starting point. We continue to be challenged by colonization, marginalized by the legislation of the Indian Act that keeps us locked in a minimum position on a very small land base. Our populations grow with no expansion of our land base to accommodate our growth, with many of our people leaving the overcrowded conditions in their home communities and making their way into the cities. The original peoples today continue to suffer higher rates of poverty, homelessness, and malnutrition than other people in this country. We have lower levels of access to health services, which are often culturally unsafe and can be traumatic. The original people tend to have significantly lower socioeconomic well-being than Canadians in this country. Assimilation is just as much a major force in this country as it was at the time of Confederation, and is at the root of our continued suffering as a people, disconnecting us from our spiritual way of life that is tied to the land. We have been blessed to evolve with an individual knowledge, history, identity, role, and responsibility as the free and independent original people and the true leaders of our homeland. To continue to dominate and assimilate us would not only be our detriment as a people, but to the detriment of all who seek to learn our original knowledge, the knowledge that can be added to the knowledge of humanity, and that can help us survive as human beings living in these critical times. To expect us to share that invaluable knowledge while at the same time facing the continued forces of assimilation is not fair. We have a monumental problem in our nation that we have been incapable to date of solving, and that is the problem of systemic racism, a system that keeps a people disconnected from their identity, forced into assimilation. We are challenged to find peaceful ways of correcting the wrongs that are still being done, not restricted only to apologies, and to keep a people oppressed is not right. The best hope we have is in the hands of the knowledge holders. Creating ethical space means positioning the elders and the knowledge holders who are rooted in our ceremonies, languages, and tradition in a position of influence in the stewardship and management of our lands and territories, together with the united efforts of the scientists. Our well-being as all peoples is determined by returning to the source, to the living knowledge of the land. We need to step outside the systems and create new relationships with each other that are grounded upon our relationship with the land. Our ancient indigenous knowledge has survived the assimilationist approach, but is still threatened, especially since our knowledge holders are getting older, with minimal transmission of their knowledge to the younger generations. This is the first priority, to support the knowledge holders and put them in their rightful place of leadership. This can be done by supporting the national growth of knowledge holders that is currently already in place and that can be extended to take the lead from a position of total independence and autonomy. Then, respectively challenge the knowledge holders to respond to what approaches can be made to position the original peoples to manage the Boreal Forest, which runs through our territories, providing an example of indigenous thought and indigenous leadership in action. At present, there are 600 First Nation communities living within the Boreal Forest. Through the leadership of the knowledge holders, they can set the stage to bring a whole new narrative instead of the total colonial environment that currently exists. Their leadership would be rooted in the land and in indigenous thought. Call upon them now to offer a new vision for this country, to provide a knowledge that can help give us greater understanding of our human identity, original instructions, duties, and responsibilities. It's not fair for our children, for all children, to be denied their human identity. This is the issue of the day. We all face an identity crisis. What is needed is the implementation of what we refer to as the grandmother's law. These are the sacred responsibilities of raising a child, which begin with nurturing and supporting the identity of a child. This requires extended family with community support. Join us, support us as the original peoples to live out our natural leadership in our homeland. There is no reason whatsoever to feel intimidated by our leadership, which is about living a vision that can unite us all and truly reconcile with the wrongs that have been done to our people and that have been done to the land. Correcting the wrongs and making things right is long overdue. Apologies have been accepted. Some legal cases have been won and paid out, but very little has changed. We have waited patiently for this moment in time to be recognized for our identity as a spiritual people loving the land so much. Provide us with the resources to support our resurgence, centered around our ancestral centers of knowledge. Support our regional networks through which indigenous knowledge can be shared that will help to create unity and collaboration amongst our nations, which strengthens our voice and the capacity to share. Receiving indigenous knowledge within indigenous environments, such as our teaching lodges and on the land, helps keep us rooted in our indigenous paradigm established through the ethical space created by ceremony. Focus on the youth of all cultures and backgrounds as a target group for education in indigenous knowledge, and prioritize revamping our education system that is inclusive to indigenous approaches that can provide a foundation. We are in need of a vision that can unite us in our efforts to take better care of the earth. The vision of indigenous peoples carries the memory of the original instructions of how we should live and act as human beings, connected with the land and behaving in accordance with the laws of nature. Prophecy foretold of a time when Indigenous people would find themselves in the forefront of a peaceful movement. Once the ethical space for this movement has been established, we will properly position to share our knowledge with our brothers and sisters who have arrived on our homelands. Time does not allow me to share more. It is my hope that our engagement and coming together will truly manifest in a much more caring world. I accept the fact that we are evolving as human beings and that it will take time and commitment to create a better world and a more peaceful world. It is a legacy that we must leave for our children. Miigwech. Thank you.
Hi, Elder Dave. I'm now going to invite our listeners, our witnesses, Kelly Bannister and Karen Smith-Fargy and Gleb, to now provide some brief reflections.
Thank you, Danica. And my deepest thanks to our elders and knowledge holders for the profound and generous sharing that you have gifted into this session on ethical space. My role, I've been studying ethics and biocultural ethics, learning about ethical space for many years. And my role in this event today is to be a listener and to help to carry what is shared on this day forward into my work and more importantly, into my personal being, to be listening deeply and to be able to be open and transformed by what is shared. So I'm so deeply moved and filled by what was shared that I feel not that able, not much with the capacity to reflect because I'm still taking it in. I want to offer my thanks to the knowledge holders and the elders and to Danica for facilitating this work. And as I sit deeply with these messages, I will be considering how to bring these important teachings into our work as we develop ethical guidance for working together. That's part of what we've been doing. How can we put these in words that will be helpful to other people? So thank you for sharing from your various places, in your different languages, from your different sources of wisdom and knowledge in your knowledge systems. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Karen, would you like to share any words?
Thank you, Danica. And I echo Kelly's gratitude, and I'd like to acknowledge the elders and the opening, and thank you, Elder Dave, and the Ira and Elmer and Vicky. Your words, wisdom, have washed over me, and what's resonating for me right now in the arc of this dialogue, and I have a deep gratitude to be present in this learning circle and to sit in a really important role of listener and to feel that and to think about how I can carry these knowings forward. And what surfaced for me in the arc of listening is this sense of importance of shared relationships with our own spirit, with our own hearts, within our minds and our landscapes. And the landscape that I'm blessed to sit on today, and in fact this morning, the landscape that I'm blessed to sit on today is north of the Saskatchewan River and west of Edmonton, and in traditional territories of Cree and the Alexa and Nakota Sioux and Dene peoples, and it's a very important area for traditional gathering. And this morning before the seminar, I went out because I know there's a place within the forest in the wetland area where there's sweet grass, and I know if I walk through and brush against that grass, I can smell that grass. And this is what I felt today, sitting in the circle of
these wisdom holders is that I could smell their wisdom coming up and surfacing for me, and I'm really grateful for that. And what surfaced up for me is this sense of, we talk about reconciling ways of knowing, but what the elders have shared today, what I heard was, well, let's talk about reconciling ways of understanding. Let's talk about ways of reconciling how we live together, our ways of being. And then we can talk about reconciling ways of knowing. I also heard hope, and I want to thank the elders for that. I heard a lot of hope, and I think that's also a message that we need to carry forward, and a learning that we need to carry forward. So hi, thank you.
Okay, I would like to now turn to the Reconciling Ways of Knowing team. Dr. Nancy Turner is a project founder with Reconciling Ways of Knowing, and unfortunately, she must convey her deepest regrets for not being able to attend our seminar today due to circumstances beyond her control. And so what we'll now do is invite Miles Richardson and Dr. David Suzuki to join the circle and to provide the reflections on ethical space. Sorry, either Miles or Dr. David Suzuki can go
well,
ahead.
I've got, my brain is just kind of twirling around with so much of what has been shared today. I thank all of the participants here for this really, really important discussion. I'd never really understood what ethical space is, and I realize now that in the kinds of things I've been concerned about, which is how one reconciles modern science with indigenous ways of knowing, that if we don't have ethical space, we can't even begin a serious conversation about that. I was struck by what Ira said, where corporations are mandated to consult with a community that is going to be impacted by some kind of development. And I've seen this happen over and over again on the West Coast, where logging company will fly into some very remote community and they're mandated to consult. So the guy will call up, "Hi, Maisie, how are you? How are the kids? Been a while. Everything okay? And thank you." And that's consulting with the community. It's a joke. But I was most struck by Vicky's question of, how long can we wait? How do we wait for the settlers to become of a place? And this is the real challenge, because at my age, I don't have much time left, but I see that the battles that I've been involved with are all coming to a crunch now, whether they're species extinction or climate change. That time is very limited. And how do we get people who have come to accept that the economy is the source of everything that matters? How do we get them to actually even be open to seeing a different perspective in an ethical space? I don't think they could even come to that. Just a couple of anecdotes. I remember when I was working in Toronto at CBC, and they had one of these bring your child to work days, and this little boy came in, son of one of the producers, and he came in my office and he was laughing at his sister. He said, "My sister is so stupid, she thinks Kentucky Fried Chicken is a bird." And that really struck me at how distant we've become from the things that really matter. I tell kids in Toronto, when you turn on the tap, do you know where the water comes from? They don't know. It comes from the tap. So I say, it comes from Lake Ontario. I say, when you flush the toilet, what happens to that? They don't know. I said, well, after it goes through a treatment, it goes out into Lake Ontario. They don't understand the interconnectedness of everything, and the fact that their way of life is dependent on all of the things that Mother Earth does to keep us alive. And that is, that's a big hurdle that we all face to recognize that this is has become one way of knowing that is very constrained, and that we've got to enter into conversation in an ethical space so that we can begin to see the world in a different way. We don't have time to indigenize the settlers. I'm a settler, and I've been very fortunate in having people share their knowledge with me. But as Ira says, to really fully appreciate that knowledge, you've got to be in and of it for basically a lifetime. And that's pretty hard for most people to do. So you've set my mind just racing, and I want to thank all of you who've shared your insights with me. And I hope this whole notion of reconciling ways of knowing will carry on over the months, and we'll be able to come to some kind of way of seeing how we actually get to that ethical space. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, since we're having some trouble with some of the audio, we may have to return to Miles once we're able to get some kind of connection. What I'd like to do now is to go to some of the questions. And I wanted to open the responses to all of the questions to our speakers so far who are able to connect. And I will be starting sort of from the earlier questions. So I think one of the first questions that I saw come up in the chat were, how can we think about reconciling ways of knowing in a time when Indigenous peoples are not necessarily being recognized or hired as experts? So we have sort of, we still see a trend of non-Indigenous peoples being sort of put forward as experts about Indigenous peoples. So how do we understand moving forward in that sort of context? So I'll just open it up to our speakers to answer. And anyone who would like to respond would be.
I can begin with maybe just a few words. I think what we've come to the habit of thinking that we want people to talk about Indigenous ways, Indigenous circumstances, but we don't invite people to speak from. And this is the responsibility for groups of people to be invited to speak from, and institutions or organizations to be held accountable to the need to hear from versus about is a very important nuance. So we can have experts outside of the people who might know about, but the voices from are very important. And here's where we have the revitalization and resurgence aspects of the cultural of reconciling. We need to move beyond the reconciling to the resurgence and the knowledge of the peoples and the knowledges of those peoples.
Okay, thank you so much, Vicki, for that response. I want to move on to another question. We had a question from a secondary school teacher in Ontario who built an outdoor medicine wheel garden classroom and has concerns about how to sort of deal with concerns around cultural appropriation while moving through reconciliation and bringing some elements of sort of, I guess, Indigenous identity and knowledge into the classroom. So maybe I'll ask Ira if you would like to begin to answer that.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say, great questions. I'm so encouraged to hear all your questions, and I'm actually, I want to take a stab at all of them because they're so interesting. But I think the answer that I'll give to this one here, it's quite reaching to, as an overall arching theme to all of them. And that goes back to what I was talking about an ownership of this knowledge. So when I talked about who I am in my community and who I am with working with the people in my community, I have a respect, I have a responsibility to my nation to ensure that I have those accountabilities to my community. So with that being said, to the person who talked about the class with the medicine wheel, I have to ask the question of the person who created the medicine wheel. Did you create the medicine wheel with an Indigenous person? I think it's really important, and I don't mean to take away your intent. Now, if your intent was to teaching, to creating those awarenesses and those knowledges and sharing, I don't want to stifle that, but at the same time, I don't want you to recreate an instance where you are, in fact, doing a degree of appropriation. My point is that, and I want to thank Dr. Suzuki about his point when he acknowledged that when you're working with Indigenous people, they're coming with a lifetime of knowledge. They're coming with a breadth of knowledge. So what's the answer? You can look at that and say, wow, that is so much. I can't even begin to understand those knowledges, so I won't. And I never want to get people to that point of view. What my answer to that is a lifetime, yes. So then work with those people with those knowledges. Do things together. Never do it without. So I would recommend to the person who created the medicine wheel to revisit it. When I shared my knowledges with you, I can tell you all the elders that I worked with in my community, who I acquired which knowledges with. Just for example, my Iniscum stone that I have, it was transferred to me by Magwayapuka, Bruce Wolfchild, from the blood people. So when you work with these knowledges, you can't say, I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to go ahead and create this thing because with good intent. I'm sorry, you can't. You need to do it with somebody. It's got to be someone from your traditional territory who understands those things and the importance of those things, because they can be misconstrued, they can be misinterpreted. So that's what I have to say to that. It's about it's about the ownership of the knowledges. So yeah, so I'll leave it there. I can go on and on, I'm sure, but I will make it brief, and I hope that helps.
Thank you so much, Ira, for your fulsome response to that. I want to move on to another question that came up, which was that there are instances where organizations are creating their own guidance documents for sort of building good relationality between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And I wondered if any of the panelists have any thoughts on moments when those documents are created. Like, how useful do you think those documents are? How important are they? And what are your thoughts on those types of efforts in general? And anyone who would like to answer that is free to jump.
Dana, can I respond to that really quickly? I think that there's been, much effort by many people to try to create more bridges between Western thought and certainly, our perspective as Indigenous peoples. From the stories that the elders have shared with me in my life, it's about the spirit of being able to share and be able to give. And I believe that's the challenge that we're faced with today, is how do we create the spirit of a relationship that's based on respect. For example, the previous question, that is it appropriation, of knowledge that's shared in the schools? I think, first of all, we have to recognize that most of the education institutions are academic. And I think to try to indigenize, those institutions, that ceremony is the foundation of, our engagement with spirit and with each other. And I applaud people that, are making efforts to try to know more about who we are as a people. And I think that's the role that the academic institutions can play, is to share the truth of the history of what has happened to Indigenous people, what is currently still going on in terms of the environment that we still continue to find ourselves. I think when it comes to learning more of the deepness of that identity, it's exactly what Ira had said, and others have said. If you want to get to know us, then you need to come within our environment where you're always welcome. And there's a word, that our people use, to describe, like when you have received the knowledge, you'll say, now you can carry a message that you have received, that message from the knowledge people. And there is a responsibility that is needed, to be able to carry a message. And that message has to come through your own experience and what you have learned. And there's a lot of responsibility with that. None of us can claim anything, but everything belongs to everyone. So in that spirit, we try to share as much as we can, provided, that people will see the value of the sacredness of what is being shared. And we are challenged today more than ever, to come up with people that are really operating from the spirit of their own heart. That is going to be the heart from humanity itself that will take us to a higher level of understanding. And our children should be given the opportunity to be able to come and be within that environment, to be able to listen to the drum as it carries the voice of the people. The children should be given the opportunity to be with the knowledge keepers or the mentors, and to take them to the sacred sites of our people, to share with them why life is so sacred, why the land to us is the mother to all of life. And there's some very basic teachings, universal teachings, that can act as the beginning of learning about life itself. And I've heard many times by the elders, do you want to know about life? And we would respond, yes. And the elders would say, well, let me take you to the land, and I will let you feel the land. Then you will get to know the land. So I applaud anyone that's making an effort to want to learn, but do not take away the leadership that we have as a people. That is our duty and responsibility as a people, to set the leadership in terms of our engagement and our sharing of our knowledge. You go.
And now I'm going to move to one last sort of set of questions that I saw up here, which I think are very important. We have a few Indigenous people who are following this conversation with us today. And a few of them sort of asked us about sort of wellness as Indigenous peoples in the context that we're talking about. And one asked, as a young Indigenous scholar, how do I deal with feelings of frustration and anger at injustice and disrespect for knowledge systems? And another asked, like, how do I ensure wellness in a context where I'm working with a lot of non-Indigenous peoples on Indigenous issues, and maybe trying to deal with some unconscious bias that must be confronted, as we've all had to confront in our lives. So I want to open it up for any guidance or reflections from our panelists on those sort of two questions.
Well, I always ask the question, in our times as Indigenous people, how do we find our medicines? In other words, how do we find those practices, those understandings, those teachings, those aspects of practice that help us find wellness, stay wellness, and walk with wellness? And so I think each of our ways, each of our cultures has these ways, these teachings, these values, whether that is in my tradition, it would be the grandfather teachings, it would be the medicines of ceremony. And so we, in my experience, finding those that are sufficient to us, the ones that speak and nourish us, is a very, very important journey to be on in our time. And I think in many ways, many of the issues and crises that we're facing is asking all of us to do this work of finding these practices and ways that help us all find wellness, health, and a good way forward. So I think that intent of finding that, what are your medicines, or what are the medicines that help you in our time? And we have the tradition of putting those in your medicine bundle. What is the bundle that you carry with you as you walk in kindness and gratitude? Chimikwich, for the question. It's a wonderful question.
Any other responses to that?
As a people, we've always had ways and means, in dealing with rites of passage. And when it comes to young people, there's a very specific rite of passage that we're encouraged to experience. For example, for the young girls, when they're becoming a woman, there's a teaching, that's called Makoskeren, which is learning to be like the bear. And just at that time when the young girl believes that she's taken to the grandmother, to learn the teachings of the grandmothers on how to be a woman that can bring life, into this world. And also you have the young boys, that are encouraged during the time of their puberty, to go on the land to seek and go on a vision quest. It would be at that time of that rite of passage as that young boy reached out for a vision, that they would plead and humble themselves to the Great Spirit to give them a vision that would offer them purpose and meaning to their life. And the young girl that had questioned, working about the whole issue of wellness, always begins with spirit. And, through the knowledge keepers of our people, they've always encouraged us never to overstep the spirit. Because within each of us, there is a spirit that carries our identity, that carries our gifts, that carries who we are as human beings. And it doesn't matter, where we can find ourselves once we have found ourselves in our uniqueness of our own spirit that identifies who we are as human beings. And the greatest teacher that we all have is Mother Earth. And really what it takes is time and commitment, to go on the land and to feel the land, to talk to the trees, as forest as it may sound, but it is true that they are voices that come from the land through creation. The trees can talk to you if you open your heart and you allow your spirit to communicate with the voice of the land itself. The mothers have been displaced, from their rightful role. And I would encourage, the young people of today, to give themselves that opportunity to experience that rite of passage, so they'll come to understand even more. If I was in a position of power, I would take all the young boys of this country and take them to the land to seek their vision that will guide them in their life, and I guarantee you, the whole country will change. And when the young girls would be allowed to listen to the love and unconditional love that the grandmothers had for all children, the world would change. We would be able to be in a much better position, to support life in the way that we have been gifted by our great Creator. Thank you.
Difficulties with permissions, first from Glenn and from Miles on today's session. Go ahead, Glenn.
Great. Apologies for technical difficulties earlier. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this enlightening conversation. It's been a privilege to be learning from the elders on this journey that began for me many years ago. And today I'm privileged to be greeting you from the traditional territory of Tlahuquit people whom I have a very loving relationship with and continue to learn from on a daily basis. And one of the teachings that I'd like to bring to this table is one of courage. And the reason why I'd like to mention it is that I hear from a lot of up-and-coming researchers as well as established researchers in academia about their great interest and desire to work with Indigenous peoples to, quote unquote, tap into Indigenous knowledge, to bring Indigenous knowledge to bear on their research, but they're worried about the lack of safe space and lack of comfort entering this kind of discussions. And one of the teachings that I've learned from Tlahuquit is about courage. And a great friend, Joe Martin, who's a master carver, a Tlahuquit master carver, shared with me this teaching that he would pinch his thumb and forefinger and say, if you don't have courage, if you're afraid, that's as much as you're going to learn. And then he would spread his arms and point toward Hahufi, his traditional territory, and would say that with courage, that's how much you will learn. And so I think it's important for researchers, academicians entering this space to have courage and not to be afraid to be challenged, not to be afraid to be to question their fundamentals of their own understanding of the world, and be open to learning. And I think only through this kind of challenging ourselves, we can be prepared to enter this ethical space, because for me, ethical space is a place of transformation. It's a place where it's not easy to enter, and you have a lot of work to do entering it. But that's where your spirit, your mind transforms, and we're all so much better for it. And one other thought that just reflecting on everything that I've heard, all the wisdom that's been shared today, that I would like to share is that we tend to think about ways of knowing or knowledge sharing, knowledge co-production in sort of black and white terms. There's this amorphous thing called science, and there's Indigenous knowledge, and so we need to find a way for them to connect with each other, as if this is something new that hasn't been done. And as we know, Indigenous peoples have been sharing their ways of knowing with each other for millennia, and their ways and process of doing it in a respectful and reciprocal way. And moreover, we need to stop thinking about knowledge as something that just resides on paper or in our head. Knowledge, the earth brims with knowledge, and we just, I'd like to resonate with Elder David Kershane shared with us, that we just need to be able to listen and hear what the earth teaches us, and to do that we need to prepare ourselves and teach ourselves how to listen. So ethical space for me is is such it's not a physical space, but a state of mind that where great learning can happen. So I thank you all for this opportunity to share your philosophy.
Thank you, Gleb. Miles?
Thank you, Danica, and for doing such a great job facilitating today's sessions. I wanted to thank Elder Corshane and Vicky for their opening this and leading us in proper ceremony to get this dialogue going in the right way. This has been really amazing. I want to thank all the panelists for all the insight and knowledge that you brought to this dialogue. This is truly a moment amongst ourselves, not only in this nation we're trying to build of Canada, but in this globe as human beings and in the challenges that are in front of us. And if we're going to address challenges like the climate crisis, protecting biodiversity, which is so essential to our well-being, and all those things, we're going to have to figure out how to coexist, how to respect each other and respect balance in all of our being, nature, including us as human beings, and recognizing and respecting our ways of knowing is so essential. You know, today here we find ourselves and we're having a national dialogue in Canada, and we have Indigenous nations. We're hearing from the knowledge keepers who've been here for hundreds, thousands of generations, thousands of years, who've prospered, built societies the equal of any that have ever been on this earth, and are facing extinction. At the same time as we have this Western system that science is the base of, that has been prevalent for the last 500 or so years, which is facing the same challenge. And we've got to figure out how to get together. And, you know, from these dialogues, I have to admit, I've got more questions than answers. And I think that's a good thing. I really look forward to continuing this dialogue. We're going to have monthly sessions and different topics as we move forward, and really look forward to a day soon where we'll be able to get together actually in one place, share ceremonies, and perhaps focus in, take this dialogue to the next level. Because, you know, not only are we do we have to learn how to get along with the rest of creation, we have to learn how to get along amongst ourselves as human beings. That's a big challenge. And, you know, I was looking at one of the questions that rolled through the screen while we're talking, and it was from a Muslim woman asking about truth in Indigenous space. How do we have the same dialogue? Do we have the same debates about fundamental truth and social truth? I think if you're going to talk to Elder Corshane, and he'll speak for himself, but every nation, Indigenous nation that I've been involved in, recognizes that the truth is just the truth. There's not a truth for Haidas and a truth for Cree. There's not a truth for Canada and a truth for the United States. As creation, there is one truth, and it's one of our challenges in living a good life as a human beings to in our limited capacity as human beings to understand what that truth is the best we can, and to build and to recognize that we can't negotiate with that truth. That is imposed on us by powers much greater than us. And it's our challenge to understand them and live them. That's what I've heard from Indigenous traditional leaders across this Turtle Island. And it's very much a challenge for us as humans. You know, in my own people's cosmology, we talk about powers, spiritual powers that give power to our earthly powers, the undersea world, the forest world, the upper world. And we talk about sacred one standing still and moving. Imagine that, standing still and moving at the same time. Being dark and light simultaneously, being dark and light at the same time. Things that we as humans can't even wrap our mind around. So we've got to have some trust, some faith in basic understandings and define our values and our ways of living, our ways of being in such a way that we can stay in accordance with those understandings of truth. Because if we deviate, we pay in direct proportion to our transgressions. We need to understand that. That's part of what we're going through now with these climate crises and these biodiversity challenges and the big issues we face as humans. So I thank all the panelists. It was awesome listening to you, and look forward to the coming sessions, the coming webinars for Reconciling Ways of Knowing as we sharpen each other up and share each other's knowledge and figure out the best way forward. Hawa. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you so much, Miles. I'm so happy that we could get you and Gleb to provide some reflections after those audio difficulties. We are now at the end of our session, and we find ourselves coming to the closing of our convening. And I wanted to extend my sincere thanks to the Reconciling Ways of Knowing team, as well as to all of the wonderful speakers and people who provided their thoughts and perspectives on ethical space for us today. I was so privileged to serve as a facilitator, and it was really amazing to see all of the feedback and questions that I couldn't get to everybody, but really we are so blessed to have your participation and those who are watching this recording to continue to understand what you carry forward as a listener, as a witness, as a participant from what you have heard today. I would now like to call upon Elder Dave and Vicky to provide us with our.
Thank you, Danica. I think for me, there is no word in our language that reflects goodbye. We need to continue to offer words of gratitude for all the blessings that we receive in life. And it is in that spirit, as we come to the end of our session here, that we say, until we meet again. But the Spirit is always invoked to stay within our presence in whatever we do as we live our life. And I want to thank my colleagues, for sharing your heart, for what is being revealed as it was prophesied, that the truth would be revealed, in our homeland, which means, the combination of all the uniqueness of knowledge and the uniqueness of identity that we see, that we are surrounded by, that it is only in spirit that we'll be able to show respect, for each other in terms of our individual identities that we live. But we do have a universal responsibility, and that is to be able to work together to take better care of the earth. So I would say, in closing, I would say, thank you.
So I will close with a song I'm just going to introduce to you, and for me, this is a instrument that describes the reconciling that we've been trying to create, and that the space, the sounding of this flute is an imagination of the sounding of our ethical space.
Thank you, Vicki. And thank you, Danica, and to each of our speakers on ethical space and everyone who's joined us today. We'll be sending out a short survey after this session to get your feedback on today's session. It would be great if you could take a few minutes to share your thoughts with us. And we're working to organize another session for late September. This one will be a dialogue with Dr. Robin Wall-Kimmerer, the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, facilitated by Dr. Nancy Turner, who was in the end able to join us today as a panelist, but wasn't able to participate as she missed most of the session. And we're really glad she could make it in the end. We'll have details on that event coming for you very soon. And as Miles mentioned, we hope to present about one dialogue per month over the coming months, including one coming quite soon on two-eyed seeing, which I believe perhaps it was Ira who was speaking about. One of our speakers was talking about actually, I think it was Vicki. There we go. And so we'll be organizing those sessions on a monthly basis until we're able to organize our in-person forum. And you can visit our website at waysofknowingforum.ca to be able to be sure that you're signed up for updates. And you can follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. And last but not least, please donate to support our ability to bring you these dialogues. You can do that at waysofknowingforum.ca. And thank you again for all of your time today.